Thanks for joining today. Today we're covering Document Control Kickoff with MediaLab. Document Control with MediaLab is designed to ensure all of your documents have been reviewed, they're current, and readily available to your employees with the appropriate access. The system helps to ensure that these documents are relevant to your employees based on their job duties and that they have been authorized for approval by the CLIA lab director or designee before they are available to those employees. It's also used to ensure that documents are reviewed at least every 2 years by a CLIA lab director or designee. All of your current documents are kept as read-only, which means they can only be edited by certain users with the author administrator permissions. Any discontinued documents are removed. Your end users will never see those, but they are kept indefinitely in MediaLab, so admins can always access these retired documents when they want. MediaLab never gets rid of retired documents. We don't delete those. That is up to you as the customer. One of the first things that you'll want to do when you're getting started with document control is identify who is going to be responsible for creating and maintaining user accounts, creation of manuals and submanuals, and managing permissions, approval workflows, and generally overseeing the document control implementation process. These are going to be called site administrators. We also have document administrators and document authors, which are document control specific. So site administrators can identify document authors and document administrators for adding documents to their sections, their manuals, revising documents in those manuals, and pulling reports and performing periodic review. We're just going to briefly go over these 4 main implementation steps. In this kickoff, we're going to cover creating manuals and submanuals as the first step. We're going to cover adding permissions to the CLIA lab director, your authors, your administrators, and your performing employees, your end users. We're going to go over creating approval and periodic review workflows. And then finally, we're going to show you how to add documents to these newly created manuals. When you log into your MediaLab account, you'll want to make sure you're in document control by clicking on this app selector in the upper blue bar. And then we'll click document control from the list here. It's going to bring us to our home page by default. The first thing that we're going to do is build our manuals. So we're going to click this Edit Manuals and Labels tab. We're going to have a link in the upper left corner to start adding those manuals. So I'm going to click this link, and we're going to start by adding our first department manual. Let's say a chemistry manual. The description is optional. You can leave that blank. When you're adding a new manual, you can choose the custom numbering for the documents added to the manual. The first option is default numbering. The second option is custom numbering. So if you already have a numbering system in place for your documents outside of MediaLab, you can use that same numbering in MediaLab. So for example, for this chemistry manual, I'm going to use the prefix as CHEM. The starting number I'll leave as 1. So this means the first document that I add to my chemistry manual, as it is right now, is going to be numbered Chem 1. We're going to click to add the manual. When we add a new top-level manual, it's going to give us options for the next steps. The first option is editing the contents of this new manual, aka adding documents or submanuals. The second option is adding permissions for this manual. Now, the recommendation is to start adding your submanuals before you start adding permissions. So we're going to click this first link to begin editing the contents of our new chemistry manual. It brings us to the chemistry manual here. We're going to have a link in the middle of this page to add a new submanual within this manual. Now, submanuals are optional, but they are recommended because you may have different permission requirements or sign-off requirements, different approval or review situations for different chemistry documents, for different subsections or instruments, maybe even document types like forms or procedures. By having submanuals, it's going to make it easy for a site administrator to delegate those permissions, those approval processes, and so on. I'm going to show you an example of adding a submanual after a document type. So I'm going to click this link in the middle of the page. We'll see that we're in that chemistry top-level manual. We'll have a box to enter the submanual name, and I'm just going to again add one for maybe procedures. Next is the number, custom numbering here again. It's going to inherit the numbering of the parent manual, so CHEM. But if you do number your procedures slightly different than your forms under chemistry, for example, this is how you're going to make sure that they have those separate numbering prefixes. And so I'm going to enter the prefix maybe here as chem-SOP because these are now procedures. When I add that manual, I'm going to get a little prompt at the top of the page to edit the contents of this new sub-manual. I can go back to the parent manual, or if you already have in mind the number of sub-manuals you're going to add to your parent manual, you can just knock them out really quickly. So I'm just going to continue on and start adding another sub-manual here, and this one's going to be for forms. Just like we did before, if I want to use a custom number for the specific chemistry form sub-manual, I'm just going to click this option once again. And now I'm going to do FRM to represent chem forms. So they're still under the chemistry manual. They still have that original prefix of CHEM, but now they're just slightly different with the numbering. They have the FRM at the end. All right, so once we add our parent manual and our sub-manuals for at least one manual in the system, we can start working on the permissions. Before we go into permissions, I'm going to click back on the Edit Manuals and Labels tab, and I'm going to show you a few examples of how other people have built sub-manuals. This is my demo account, and so I've built it after working with a lot of customers and seeing their setups and what's common. So this should hopefully give you a good idea of how you could potentially structure your manuals in your account. So the first example is my original chemistry manual here. I'm going to click on that manual, and this is a really good example of many different sub-manuals under this main chemistry section. This is one example of I have my architect instrument sub-manuals separated in that way. I have a sub-manual for attachments, for forms, for policies and worksheets. When you have these different sub-manuals and documents are placed into these sub-manuals, maybe you have an attachment that's should be linked to a procedure or a form that goes along with an SOP. You can link documents in the system. So we're going to go over that once we reach the adding of the documents. So next, we're going to start by adding permissions over that newly created chemistry manual. And we're going to do this by clicking on the Settings tab and then the Permissions option here. Only site administrators can add permissions. If you're not a site administrator, you may not even see this page. So what we're going to do first is click the second link at the top left of the page. We're going to click Add a new permission to user or group for documents and manuals. This is just adding any permission to any user over any document, any manual. Document control does include a few permissions. We'll have a non-performing employee, and this is a view-only permission. They are just able to see documents. They don't have to sign on them when they change. They can simply view them in MediaLab. We have performing employee. These are going to be your users that perform an actual procedure. They're responsible for signing off on any major revisions and any new documents that are fully approved. Below that, we have our authors and administrators here. So authors can add documents to their manual, they can revise documents in their manual, and they can view reports. Some of those reports include performing employee sign-off report, document index report, all kinds of statistical reports. Below that, we have the administrator permission. They can pretty much do everything an author can do, but a little bit more. So they can add documents to their manual, they can upload revisions or revise documents, view reports just like authors. But in addition, they can print controlled copies of documents, and they can retire documents that are no longer in use. And then we have administrator plus designated reviewer. This is the designee performing the annual or biannual review in place of your CLIA lab director for their manual. Because it says administrator plus, they can do everything an administrator can do directly above here. So they can add documents, revise, print, retire reports, plus now they're going to be routed those documents for that review by default from the system. We also have the lab director, and this is going to be the individual on your CLIA license. You'll want to make sure that you add all these users to your system first before you go and grant permissions. Before we go into adding these permissions at the top of this list, we do also have an inspector permission, and this is just read-only access to your documents and viewing reports. And we have a few other called not applicable. Not applicable permissions are for very complex situations where certain users don't need to see a document or they don't need to sign off on a document, and they inherit that sign off from a group. And I'll explain how that works in just a second when we start adding that performing employee permission. So I'm going to use a common scenario here. As far as using the non-performing view only permission, it's common for most sites to maybe give this permission in a broad sense. So they may give a non-performing employee permission to all users over their common manuals that they want to give access to their entire organization. So maybe they want everyone to at least see the lab general manual and maybe see the administration manual, but they don't have to sign off on the documents in those manuals, but they can see them. Or you can add that permission over all documents. Again, this would give every user that you add to your MediaLab account the ability to view those existing documents whenever they need to. It's common for there to be multiple permissions that apply to a user. So we may have all users with the non-performing employee view only permission, but then we may have some other users that have a combination of performing employee permission over their specific manuals or author administrator permissions over their specific manuals. That's what I'm going to start with first. Is I'm going to start by adding a performing employee permission. This is where your user groups are going to come in very handy. Again, this is something that site administrators are responsible for setting up initially. Adding users and adding user groups to organize their users by job description, location, etc. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to match my chemistry group with my chemistry manual. So I'm going to do the permission over only selected manuals here. I'm going to uncheck the ones I chose before. But this is where, with our newly built chemistry manual, we can add the permission over the whole manual that includes all of its submanuals, or this is where you can drill that permission down by submanual. So maybe I don't want my chemistry users to sign off on forms, but I do want them to sign off on the procedures. And so I can do that by adding the permission only over its submanual. Once you add the permission, the system handles the rest. It's automated in that those employees are going to automatically get an email from MediaLab, and they're going to see that document on their to-do list for sign-off when a document in that chemistry procedure submanual is fully approved. Moving on to the other permissions here. Maybe I want to give someone the author or admin permission. So in this example, option A is adding this permission over a group. Now, what you're seeing in my example is I actually created groups after the supervisors or the managers. This means every user in that group will be notified or will have access to add documents to their manuals, revise documents, print, retire, etc., rather than having to grant that permission over each individual user here, which is also an option. Groups may make it a little quicker though. If you have a group for your supervisors or admins, you can just add it by group. That's what I'm going to do here. So I'm going to give my chemistry supervisors group permission over their chemistry manual. So that means they can only add documents, revise, etc. For anything added to the chemistry manual, and that's it. Next, we'll go on for the lab director here. So again, you'll want to make sure that your lab director has been added as a user. Again, individual on your CLIA license. Once you find their name in the user list here, you'll typically want to add this permission over all documents and manuals. Once we add our permissions, now we're going to have to add our approval processes for new documents and major revisions, minor revisions, and also periodic review processes as applicable. So next, we're going to switch to the Settings tab, and we're going to click on Workflows. Now, there are 4 workflows that are available in MediaLab. This page allows site administrators and document administrators with permission over all documents to configure editing collaboration workflows, which is a structured process for reviewing, editing, essentially collaborating on new documents, minor revisions, major revisions, and this happens before they can start their approval process. It is optional. We have approval processes for new documents and major revisions, the main one. This is you telling the system who needs to approve the new document or major revision to an existing document. Does it include improvers outside of the CLIA lab director? You can add multiple steps. And then we have approval processes for minor revisions. And this is you building a process for documents that have like a spelling error, formatting that needs to be changed, something minor that doesn't necessarily need anyone to approve, or at the very least, it does not need your CLIA lab director to approve. You can add someone else that has to approve minor revisions. And then finally, we have the periodic review processes. And so this is you telling the system who needs to review a document every year, every 2 years, based on your schedule. If you have multiple periodic reviewers, you'll be using this process to set that up by manual. So the first thing that we're going to build is the approval for new documents and major revisions. So I'm going to click the link to view and edit those approval processes for new documents and major revisions. Now in my demo account, you'll see I already have a bunch of workflows built for my different manuals, maybe my sub-manuals. You can even build workflows by document type, like a form, a job aid, something like that. When you want to add a new process, at the very bottom of this page, we'll have an option to add that new process for, and we're going to have these 4 options. All documents with no other defined process means every document in any manual would follow this one process, unless you start to build other workflows for different manuals, and then those will take precedence. The most common option is the second. It's an existing manual, sub-manual, or label. When you choose this option, your list of manuals will display. You can click on that plus sign to the left and it'll show your sub-manuals, meaning you can add a workflow over a sub-manual that might be different from the other sub-manual beneath that parent manual. So if you add a workflow over a parent manual, both sub-manuals would inherit it. They would follow that same process, unless you build it by sub-manual. You also, again, have this document type. You can choose from the different types in MediaLab, like if your templates never require, a normal approval process, maybe they don't require any approvals, you can build the process by document type, and the document type processes override that of the manual process. So document types are one step higher than approval processes over manuals and sub-manuals. And then at the very bottom, you can add an approval process over a new label, which you would add its name here. And again, we haven't really gone over labels yet, but they're for solving complex review, approval, or permission situations. Processes that apply to labels override everything else. So first is the label that overrides the document type. Document types override manuals. And then manuals override the default process, which is all documents with no other defined process. All right, so we're going to add a new process for our chemistry manual that we added earlier. So we're going to select an existing manual, sub-manual, or label. So I'm going to build this process over my chemistry parent manual. I'm going to click to add. On the next page, we'll see the workflow right here in the middle, and you'll notice it's adding the lab director approval step automatically. So this is an inherent MediaLab feature. When you add an approval process for new documents and major revisions, your CLIA lab director, that person with the permission that you selected from the settings permissions page, this is the person added as the last step automatically. However, it's pretty common to have approvers outside of this lab director, maybe your supervisors, your managers. And so we're going to add a new step here at the bottom. First, we just need to give it a description. This can be their job title, or it could be simple. You could type just approval. What we commonly see is the job title. So I'm going to just type chemistry supervisor, let's say. The ordering doesn't matter yet. They have to be before the lab director. Once we start adding more steps, then you can adjust the ordering. Lab director is always last for new documents and major revisions. To who are you giving this step or adding this step to? Your list of user groups are at the top of this list, which means you can add a group as an approval step to this workflow. Or if you keep scrolling, you can select the individual user. So if you were to add a group as an approval step, so remember I created a user group called Chemistry Supervisors, and I may have a handful of people in this group. So let's say I want to add the approval step to the supervisor group. When I add that step, what we'll see here is only one member is displayed. So if I have more than one user in my Chemistry Supervisors group, every single member in that group will get an email from MediaLab. We'll see the document on their to-do list needing their approval, but only one has to actually approve. Whoever gets to it first, once they approve, it'll drop off the other one user's to-do lists. So this is a great option if it doesn't matter who in a group needs to approve, you just need someone. But if you do need a specific user's name or electronic signature on that new document or major revision, you'll want to add it to that specific user instead. So for example, I can edit this step. You can always edit these steps at any time. I'm going to scroll down and find myself here. So we'll say I'm the chemistry supervisor. I'll save that. We can go back to the process. And so now you'll see the workflow. Document is first has to be finished with the editing process. The author or the administrator who made that revision or who uploaded a brand new document that they just wrote, they're responsible for starting this pre-configured approval process. So it goes to me first, I approve, then the lab director approves, and then the document would automatically go out to those employees, the performing employees, for sign-off based on that performing employee permission that you've already granted over that manual here, chemistry. And so you can add any number of steps to these processes. Below the add a new step section, you're going to see a few more options. You can turn off or on sequential ordering, and this just applies to steps outside of the lab director. Again, the lab director is the last step. Maybe in some scenarios or for some manuals or sub-manuals, you don't need your CLIA lab director to approve. You can always turn that off here if you need to. You would just save changes if you made that selection. Below that, you can go ahead and knock out the minor revision approval process. So we have this option here. Do we want to use this same workflow for minor revisions in the chemistry manual? And so you can choose the options here. Yes, with or without lab director approval, or no, don't use this for minor at all. Below that, do you want to have completion of a minor revision count as a periodic review if you chose to use it for the same process as the new and major? So by default, it's going to default to minor revisions do not count as periodic review, but you can override that here. And then finally, you're going to have an option to copy approval steps from other manual workflows as you start building them in the system. This might save you time if you have similar workflows across different manuals. Once you copy the steps, you can always add additional steps that apply to that one manual. If you ever need to delete these processes, that option is at the very bottom of this page. And then at the very, very bottom is the history. So if you ever need to see who changed or created this workflow, that history is listed at the bottom. So we're going to go back to settings and then workflows once again. We're going to click back to view and edit approval processes for new documents and major revisions. So here's the one that I just added a second ago. And the process for the next step is we're going to continue adding that a workflow for each other manual that I have in my system as applicable if they do have those different approvers. Once the approval processes for new documents and major revisions are set, we're going to hop back to settings once again, click on workflows, and now we'll focus on the minor revision approval processes, which you can also configure outside of the approval processes for new documents and major revisions. I'm going to show you an option when we click on this link to set a site-wide setting. At the top of the page, however, we'll have the list of minor revision processes that currently apply to our manuals, and we'll see where we can continue adding those additional processes below. But if we scroll down a little bit further, we can set an overall setting for all minor revisions. And so you can say, by default, I want all minor revisions to follow that of new documents and major revisions, those approval processes that I set up for that, again, with or without lab director approval. So if that's the case, you choose your default option here, save the setting, and you don't have to worry about building the minor revision processes. But if they do have different approvers, again, you can build it by manual here. Now that we finished building the minor revision approval processes, we're going to click on Settings, Workflows. We're going to scroll down and we're going to focus on building the periodic review processes. We're going to click to view and edit document periodic review processes. We're going to scroll down the page and we're going to add that new process. And this is where we'll select again an existing manual or submanual, a document type. I'm going to choose an existing manual or submanual, and I'm going to select my chemistry submanual here, maybe my chemistry procedures. I'm going to click to add that periodic review process. And on this next page, this is where we're going to start adding our review steps. Now remember, if you only have one designated reviewer for this departmental manual, you can instead give the user the administrator plus designated reviewer permission, which is under Settings, Permissions. If you have multiple reviewers for that manual, you'll want to build this periodic review process. And so I'm going to add my steps one at a time. I'm going to say the first step is my chemistry lead. I'm going to add their description. I'm going to scroll down and choose the name from this user list, and I'm going to add that step. Next, I'm going to add my chemistry supervisor. So I'm going to add their step description. The ordering now I can choose as the first or the last step. And then who, again, scroll down your user list and locate that person's name. And you'll confirm by clicking the Add Periodic Review Process step. And so here we have the workflow. The periodic review process begins. The user that's first in line, they'll get the document on their to-do list at least 90 days in advance. Once Jordan here completes his review, then it'll hit Mallory's to-do list and she has to complete her review. Once she completes her review, then the periodic review is complete, and that sets the clock for the next review for the following years. So when you're adding these periodic review processes, just like before, you'll want to scroll down to make sure all of the other settings are as you like them. Sequential ordering, remember you can turn that off. So if I wanted to have my lead and my supervisor review in any order, or they both would get the document in their to-do list at the same time, one of them can get to it first, I can turn off that sequential ordering. Since I added this periodic review process over a sub-manual, we'll have an option to override the process of the parent manual if there are any, or if it should apply in addition to the parent manual if there are any. So we'll go back to settings and workflows once again. So once you build your approval processes for new documents, minor revisions, and your periodic review processes, you can optionally create the editing collaboration workflow, which again happens before approval. And again, this is optional. Not many people use this workflow in general, but I'll show you as far as building it, it works the same way as how we built the other processes. We would just build this by manual or submanual or document type. Once we choose the manual or submanual, we add that workflow. We're just once again going to add those steps to the process. Or this is a good example of I can copy steps from maybe my periodic review process or my approval process for new documents and major revisions. It'll save me time from entering those steps and selecting the user over and over again if it's the same person. So I'm going to scroll down this page. I'm going to copy steps from another process here. And I'm going to select my chemistry approval process. I'm going to confirm by clicking Copy Steps. And you'll see that it added me as the step automatically because I was in the approval process for the new documents and major revisions for that specific manual. The whole idea of the editing collaboration is there's going to be multiple steps. So you're wanting multiple people to collaborate on the revision or the edits to the document. Again, no one's actually approving or adding their electronic signature. They're just simply editing and collaborating and sending it through this cycle. I'm going to add one more step here just so we can get an idea. later on in the training, I'll show you what it will look like if you were to create the editing collaboration process and how you would collaborate on the document. Now that we've built our approval processes and periodic review processes, we're going to navigate to settings and then customizations. These customizations are only available to site administrators, and they include email customizations, periodic review schedules that you can set for your site, choosing your own document types or editing the MediaLab custom document types, requiring a new or an interim lab director to reapprove documents. This is when you're changing lab directors. You can customize headers and footers that display in MediaLab. And there's going to be a few other customizations that we'll cover as well. At the top of this page, you'll notice we have links to customize your own to-do list notifications and emails and the frequency at which you receive these notifications. And these are going to be based on your permissions. You can configure overall email notifications. This is including you and all of your end users and other admin users. You'll see on this page, you can choose when reminders should be sent of new assignments for approval processes or performing employee sign-offs. Special notifications, these are going to be configured on another page, which I'll show you next, and a few other options as well. You can also suppress emails if, let's say, you're just getting started with document control and you want to be sure your employees don't receive any notifications yet until you're ready. Just to be safe, you can come here and suppress those emails. You just have to remember to come back here and unsuppress them when you're ready for them to start getting those emails. So this page will let you check or uncheck the names in which you want the users to get emails. Emails will be delivered to any user with a check mark next to their name. So for example, Leslie here, she's not getting emails and she won't get any emails until I check her name and save. By default, all of your users are going to get emails. So you'd have to come here after the fact and suppress these. There's also print frequency notifications, and this is getting into once your documents have been added and then users are printing them. We'll get into that a little bit later in the training. And then as a site administrator, you can configure special notifications for key users. And this is under that option for how often they get these is under the configure overall notifications. The special notifications are if you want certain users to get these special emails if a minor revision has been made, a document's been retired, if a document's rejected during approval. You'll see all the options on the header here. And you'll see below the option to configure that special notification, and it brings you to a page where you'll just select the user in which you want to configure those notifications for. Going back to customizations, below the email section, we are going to have the schedule for periodic review. So by default, any new MediaLab account is set to every 2 years. So all documents just have to be reviewed every 2 years. That's the schedule. This is site-wide, meaning this applies to all of your documents, regardless of which manual they're located in. However, you can set the periodic review schedule by manual. To quickly show you how to do that, we're going to switch back to Edit Manuals and Labels. You're going to click on the manual or the sub-manual in which you want to change the schedule for the review. And then under Available Actions and Reports, under Manual Information and Options subheader, you'll have a link to edit manual name, numbering, or review cycle. Scroll down this page, and here you'll have the periodic review schedule. Use lab-wide default setting means it's defaulting to that site-wide setting that you set from the customizations page. But I can say this one manual or documents in this manual follow a different schedule every year, or maybe documents in this manual do not require review. You can turn that off by manual as well. All right, going back to settings and customizations. If you do have a new or interim lab director and you need them to reapprove documents, this is how you can set that up. Once you choose the new lab director from the permissions page, first you'll have to revoke the current lab director permission, and then you'll have to add it to the new lab director. And then finally, you can come here and you can select the documents or the manuals and even the document types that you want to send to them for reapproval. The Add, Edit, Remove Documents Type link, this is where you can add your own document types if none of the MediaLab default apply to your organization. You'll have an edit link to the right of each document type where you can change the print form if it's uncontrolled versus a blank. Blank copies are forms or worksheets. They print as blank, meaning we assume your users are going to fill them out. Uncontrolled, these are procedures and policies. By default, your end users or performing employees can print these. They have a watermark that says uncontrolled copies. And so you can change again if it requires periodic review, the print type, and if it requires performing employee sign-off. Whatever you choose here for requiring sign-off will override any permissions that the employee has, the performing employee permissions. If you want to add a new document type, you would just scroll down, enter the name for your type. Maybe you want to add like a report. Choose the print form if it is uncontrolled or blank, and we do have different blank options. If it's native or only provides the native format versus it's only PDF, or automatic would include both. If the periodic review is required for this type, and then once again, the performing employee sign off. Now this document type is going to show once we start adding documents and we're processing those documents, we're going to be choosing the document type. Next, I'm going to click on settings and then we're going to click back on customizations. Now we're getting into the headers and footers. So we can customize the headers and footers that display at the top of the document when you're looking at it on screen in MediaLab. We can also customize the headers that are displayed on printed copies. So they are different. We'll start by customizing document headers and footers displayed on screen and on printed face pages. What we're seeing here in my demo account is a table that I added. I uploaded my logo and I added these little placeholders to pull that document information for me all automatically. This would replace your headers that are made within your Word documents, for example. You'd want to get rid of those. To the right of the page, you're going to see the placeholders that I referred to, and you would just copy and paste them into your table. As far as building this table, you'll see the icons in this text editor. And you would just click on the icon and choose how many rows or columns are in the table. And it adds just like so. And then in each box, you can add your placeholders or your text to describe the placeholders. Below that is the option to choose a file if you want to upload your logo, which it has to be JPEG, a GIF, or a PNG. And we'll see what that header looks like once we start adding documents and viewing them in MediaLab. Next, we can customize the headers and footers for printed copies. This link is also under the Settings tab and Customizations. Further down the page, we'll have the link to customize those headers and footers for controlled, uncontrolled, blank, and manual copies of documents. The different print types are based on the document type. Uncontrolled and controlled copies are policies and procedures. Uncontrolled meaning any user by default can print these. There's a watermark in the middle of the document that says uncontrolled. They're meant to be used one time. Controlled, only administrators and authors can print. There is no watermark, and it's tracked in MediaLab so that you're notified to reprint the updated document when it does change in MediaLab. Blank copies are your forms and worksheets. They're meant to be filled out. And manual copies of documents means you're printing a whole manual that includes all documents within a manual. And so you can customize those headers and footers for each of these separate print types one at a time. Similar to customizing the headers and footers that display online, you can add placeholders and you can upload your logo. Once we're done customizing our headers and footers, back under Settings and Customizations, the very bottom of this page, there are some more customizations. Most importantly, we have this Change Options link that we highly recommend reading through just to make sure all the settings are to your liking and that they are applicable for your organization. Once you customize your change options, now we can start adding documents. We're going to click the Add Documents tab for this next part. We're going to see a link to upload one or more new documents. Now, this page looks like so because I am a document administrator over all documents. If I were an author or administrator only over certain manuals, my page would just look slightly different. I would see the list of manuals that I have permission over, and to the right of each, I would have the same upload one or more new documents link, but I'm just limited to adding documents to the manuals to which I have access. Once you locate that link to upload one or more new documents and click on it, on the following page, step 1 is to select those files from your computer. So we're going to click the Select Files button. On our computer, we're going to locate the files that we want to upload. And we're going to upload the documents in their original format. And in my case, I have 3 sample Word documents. You can select up to 25 documents to upload at once. So I'm just going to, on my keyboard, click Control or Shift, and then I'm going to click the other options. Once I click Open, on the following page, the system's going to start processing or uploading these files, and it'll prompt us on the next step. Now, while we're waiting on this to load, just be sure to upload the documents in their original format. If they aren't just a report or something that you want to store as like a PDF or an image file, those file types are also acceptable. But the idea is you want to upload something in Excel or Word so that when you're ready to make a revision, you're going to do that in MediaLab. Now we see a confirmation at the top of the page that these documents were added, and now we can finish processing. We're going to follow the link to finish processing documents. It's going to bring us to the first uploaded document. On this page, we're now going to process the document and telling the system if it's a new document or if it's already in use. We're going to confirm the title, the number, where it should go in which manual, and a few other options as well. At the very top of the page is a little preview. We can see what the document would look like in MediaLab. As a reminder, this is a Word document. You can also click this preview in pop-up window if you want to get a better idea of the whole document, see it in a wider screen. If you're satisfied with how it looks, we'll continue on to the title. All document titles have to be unique in MediaLab. In my example, I'm going to change the title. In your case, you may not need to. It's just going to pull from your file name, whatever you have it saved as on your computer. I'm going to name this Chemistry Sample Procedure just to keep it basic. And I'm going to add a number to end just to make sure that it is unique in my demo account. But again, in your case, your documents should be unique because you're adding them for the first time. The next piece is the document number. What you'll notice is the first document number section. This is a default number. Before you do anything with the custom document number or the version, first let's choose the manual in which it should go. So I'm going to add this document to my chemistry submanual, Chemistry Procedures. Now, when I click that submanual, what you'll notice is that it automatically adds that chem number. This goes back to when I was creating my chemistry manual. I added that custom manual numbering, and so this document is following that numbering automatically. If you need to override that automated number, that's what this second box is for. So if you need to, you can override that custom number and enter something else here. The version number is going to default to version 1.0. Now, in this first example, we're going to say this document is already in use outside of MediaLab. It's already approved. It's already been signed off on by our employees. And so I'm only uploading the most recent version, or that is the most recent approved and current version. And I'm going to say this one's at version 3.0. Next, we'll have the document type. So you can choose from those forms, policies, procedures. We'll have our author option. So this is optional. You don't have to add anything here. And then, is the document already in use? Again, in this example, I'm saying it is already in use. It's not a new document. And so it's not going to require any reapprovals, at least for this version that we're adding. What we need to do next is enter the last approval date for that revision. I'm going to just enter, let's say 04/12 and then 2021. I'm going to copy that date to the effective date. If that's different, you can change that. And then the document last reviewed or their last periodic review date, we'll add that here as well. This by box is going to have a list of any previously logged director names that someone else maybe have logged for their documents that they've been processing. For new users, you may just see this new in brackets, meaning you have to now manually type the name of the last lab director that approved this version that we're adding. So I'm logging the last CLIA lab director that approved this version that I'm uploading. And then next is the system of record. This is where you can enter where you can find the original signature. Is it a paper copy? Was it your previous document control method, SharePoint, master control? You're just logging that here so that it is on the signature page once we add it to the system. So in my example, I'm just going to simply put previous document control method. Now, whatever you log in this box and the lab director name box, the system's going to remember that entry so that you don't have to keep retyping. You can just select it from the drop-down menu. If you don't want to record approval for this document, you can actually override this first part by checking that box. Otherwise, continue on, make sure the effective date is correct, and then the last review date, same as when you're logging the approval date. You can change the name here, the reviewer's name, if it's different than your CLIA lab director, and then your system of record. Once again, you can enter where you can find the original signature, and then going forward for future documents that you process, you won't have to keep retyping this. Maybe some of your documents don't require periodic review. You can override this second option. If you do select this in error, you can always start the periodic review on that document later on, and that will trigger the process going forward. Next is the performing employee sign-off. By default, because we're saying this document is already in use, performing employees do not need to sign this version of the document. Regardless of your selection here, they are going to have to sign on future major revisions based on their performing employee permission. You can optionally provide additional details or prior history about this existing document here. But otherwise, you'll notice this document will be added as approved and current. It'll be available, and you can make changes or make a major or minor revision to it at any time. And before we save and add, we're going to affirm that everything is titled correctly, displays correctly to our knowledge. And now I can confirm by clicking Save Changes and Add Document. Now that document number 1 is added as approved and current, we're going to continue processing those additional documents, and I'm going to show you an example of adding a brand new document. Further down this page are your previously uploaded documents and a link to view and add. Now, if you leave your computer and you need to come back later to finish processing your documents, you can click back on the Add Documents tab, and you'll see a link to continue processing previously uploaded documents. This is going to bring us to that same page. So next, we're going to view and add a document that we'll say is brand new. I just wrote it, or the alternative is I'm uploading existing documents, but I'm adding them as new in MediaLab so that they're reapproved and signed off on in MediaLab. So on the processing page, again, we're going to view the document here just to make sure the formatting is okay and everything looks right. Our title, again, it's going to pull from your file name. I'm going to make this a chemistry policy. The number, before we add anything to the custom number box or the version number, I'm going to scroll back down and I'm going to add it to my chemistry parent manual. And again, you'll notice it automatically follows that numbering convention. In my example, because this is a new document, I am going to leave it as version 1.0. Or again, if you're going to be adding existing documents, but you want them reapproved in MediaLab, you can also start at version 1.0, or you can start at the version where you left off. So even though 4.0 may have already been approved outside of MediaLab, you're adding it as new in MediaLab. You just want to make sure those versions line up. Either way is fine. It's up to you. I'm going to leave mine at version 1.0. So I've already added it to my manual. Next is the type. So I said this was a policy, so I'm going to change the document type to policy. Like I said before, author is optional, but if you want to add something here, you can. And now for document already in use, we're going to select new document. So this is going to again require approval. It will require performing employee sign off. And now we'll note that the document is going to be added as being edited, which means we can make additional changes. And then ultimately we need to start its approval process. And I'm going to affirm that everything to my knowledge is correct, and we're going to save and add. Now that we've added that new document, we can go to the document by clicking View this document in that green box. Once we pull up the document here, we're going to see a prompt to start its approval process. We can begin editing the document again, now in MediaLab. We can see the editing history, which would just include our name as having uploaded it and the date that we did so.